In 1867 Kansas, Jeremiah McCade was considered the town failure, until two abandoned boys showed him that a man's true worth isn't measured by his losses, but by what he's willing to fight for. When the entire community mobilizes to tear his newfound family apart, can a broken man prove that love makes miracles out of the most ordinary moments? Fire crackled in the hearth of Murphy's saloon as men gathered around wooden tables, their voices mixing with the clink of coins and glasses. Outside, the Kansas wind howled through the streets of Millbrook, carrying dust and whispers of another failed harvest. But inside, warmth and laughter filled the air, at least for most folks. Jeremiah McCade sat alone in the corner, his fingers wrapped around an empty glass. The other men talked loudly about their crops, their families, their plans for the coming winter of 1867. Nobody talked to Jeremiah. Nobody even looked his way. "That McCade fellow sure has had a run of bad luck," one farmer whispered to his friend, not caring if Jeremiah could hear. 3 years now since his wheat died in the drought. "And his wife running off with that traveling salesman," another added with a shake of his head. "Man can't seem to hold on to anything." Jeremiah's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the empty glass. He'd heard it all before. The whole town knew his story, how Martha had taken their savings and disappeared in the night, how his crops had failed year after year, how he could barely keep food on his own table. The bartender, a thick man named Walsh, walked over with a rag in his hands. "You planning to order something, McCade? Or just take up space?" Heat crept up Jeremiah's neck. "Just finishing up," he said quietly, pushing back from the table. The wooden chair scraped against the floor, and several heads turned his way. He saw the looks, some pitying, some disgusted, all dismissive. To them, he was just another broken man in a hard land, someone who couldn't make it when others could. Jeremiah stood and walked toward the door, his boots echoing in the sudden quiet. As he pushed through the swinging doors, he heard the conversation pick up again behind him. "Poor fool," someone said. "Probably end up begging for work come spring." The afternoon sun hit his face like a slap. Main Street stretched before him, dusty and wide, with wooden buildings lining both sides. Other men walked with purpose, heading home to wives and children, to warm dinners and comfortable chairs by the fire. Jeremiah had none of that waiting for him. His small cabin sat 2 miles outside town, surrounded by fields that had once held promise. Now they held only stubble and regret. The place felt empty, cold, like a tomb for dead dreams. But as he untied his horse from the hitching post, something caught his attention. A sound drifted from the alley beside Morrison's general store, soft and desperate, like wounded animals trying not to cry. Jeremiah paused, his hand on the horse's reins. The smart thing would be to mount up and ride home, to mind his own business like everyone else did. He had enough troubles without looking for more. But curiosity pulled at him. The sound came again, quieter now, as if whatever was making it was trying hard not to be heard. Against his better judgment, Jeremiah tied his horse back to the post and walked toward the alley. The narrow space between buildings lay in shadow, filled with old crates and discarded barrels. First he saw nothing. Then movement caught his eye. Near the back wall, huddled behind a broken wagon wheel, 2 small shapes pressed together like scared rabbits. "Hello," Jeremiah called softly. The shapes went perfectly still. He stepped closer, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. 2 boys sat crammed together in the dirt, their clothes hanging like rags on thin frames. The older one, maybe 8 years old, had his arm wrapped around a smaller child who couldn't have been more than 5. Both children stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. Their faces were dirty, their hair tangled, their lips cracked from thirst. They looked like they hadn't eaten a good meal in days. "Easy now," Jeremiah said, crouching down to seem less threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you." The older boy's chin lifted with fierce pride despite his obvious hunger. "We're not doing nothing wrong, mister. Just resting." "I can see that." Jeremiah noticed how the boy's hand shook slightly, how the little one swayed with weakness. "Where are your folks?" Something flickered across the older boy's face. hope mixed with fear. Mama said she'd be back. She went to find Papa in Topeka. Said they'd come get us once they found work. When was that? The boy's voice grew smaller. 3 days ago. 3 days. In this weather, with no food or proper shelter. Jeremiah felt something twist in his chest. An old pain he'd tried to bury. He knew what it felt like to be abandoned, to wait for someone who might never come back. "What are your names?" he asked gently. "I'm Benjamin," the older boy said. "This here's my little brother David." He pulled the smaller child closer. "David don't talk much since Mama left." Little David's eyes were huge in his pale face. He looked at Jeremiah like he was trying to decide whether this stranger might be safe or dangerous. Jeremiah glanced around the alley, then back at the boys. People walked past the entrance to the alley, going about their business, completely unaware of the two children hiding in the shadows. Just like they'd walked past him in the saloon, unseeing and uncaring. "You boys hungry?" he asked. Benjamin's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, answering the question. The boy's face flushed red with embarrassment. Jeremiah made a decision that would change everything. "Come on then. Let's get you something to eat." Benjamin's eyes went wide with suspicion and hope fighting each other in his young face. You'd really feed us, mister?" "Name's Jeremiah McCade," he said, extending his hand. "And yes, I'd really feed you." The boy hesitated, glancing down at his little brother. David had started to lean forward at the mention of food, his small body betraying his desperate hunger even as his mind stayed cautious. "We don't got no money to pay you back," Benjamin said, his voice carrying the weight of someone far older than 8 years. "Did I ask for money?" Jeremiah kept his voice gentle, the way he might talk to a spooked horse. "Sometimes folks help each other just because it's the right thing to do." Benjamin studied his face for a long moment, those sharp young eyes searching for signs of trickery or harm. Finally, he nodded and helped David to his feet. The little boy swayed dangerously, and Jeremiah instinctively reached out to steady him. "Easy there, little man," he murmured, feeling how light the child was, how his ribs showed through his thin shirt. Anger flashed through him, not at the boys, but at whatever circumstances had left them in this condition. The walk to his cabin took 30 minutes on horseback, but with the boys riding double behind him, Jeremiah kept the pace slow and steady. Benjamin held tight to David, who had fallen asleep almost immediately, his small head resting against his brother's shoulder. "You live all by yourself, Mr. McCade?" Benjamin asked as they rode. "Just Jeremiah is fine. And yes, it's just me out here. Don't you get lonely?" The question hit harder than Jeremiah expected. "Sometimes," he admitted. "What about you boys? Just the two of you looking out for each other?" "Always has been, mostly," Benjamin said matter-of-factly. "Mama, she had a hard time after Papa died. Said we reminded her too much of him. We learned to take care of ourselves pretty good." Jeremiah's hands tightened on the reins. What kind of mother left children to fend for themselves? But he kept his thoughts to himself. These boys had been through enough without him adding his own anger to their burden. His cabin came into view as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, a stone chimney, windows that needed new glass, but it was solid and warm and his, or it had been his. Now, looking at it through the boy's eyes, he saw possibilities he'd forgotten existed. "It's nice," Benjamin said softly as they dismounted. "Real nice." Jeremiah helped David down from the horse, noting how the little boy's legs shook with exhaustion. "Come on inside. Let's get some food in you." The cabin's main room held a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, and a corner that served as his kitchen. Not much, but more than these boys had seen in days. David's eyes went immediately to the fireplace, where embers still glowed from the morning's fire. "Sit yourselves down," Jeremiah said, moving to light a lamp against the growing darkness. "I've got beans and bacon, some bread that's only a day old." He busied himself at the stove, aware of the boys watching his every move with the careful attention of those who'd learned not to trust too easily. As the smell of cooking food filled the air, He heard David's stomach rumble loudly. "When's the last time you boys ate?" he asked, not turning around. "Yesterday morning," Benjamin said quietly. "Mrs. Patterson at the store gave us some stale biscuits before she told us to move along." Yesterday morning. Jeremiah's jaw clenched as he stirred the beans. No wonder David could barely stand. When he finally set the plates before them, both boys stared at the food like they couldn't quite believe it was real. David looked to his older brother for permission before picking up his spoon. "Go ahead," Jeremiah said gently. "Eat as much as you want." They ate like starving wolves, but with careful manners that spoke of better times. Someone had taught them to say please and thank you, to chew with their mouths closed, to wait for others before starting. These weren't wild children. They were good boys who'd fallen on impossible times. As they ate, color returned to their pale faces. David even smiled when Jeremiah offered him a second helping, the first real expression of joy the little boy had shown. "This is the best food I ever tasted," Benjamin said around a mouthful of beans. "It's just beans and bacon," Jeremiah replied, but something warm spread through his chest at the boy's words. "No, sir," Benjamin said seriously. "It tastes different when someone makes it for you special. Tastes like caring." The simple words hit Jeremiah like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had said something like that to him? When was the last time he'd felt needed, wanted, useful for something other than his failures? After they'd eaten their fill, he helped them wash up at the basin. David fell asleep almost immediately when Jeremiah laid him on the small cot in the back room, exhaustion finally claiming him completely. Benjamin lingered in the main room, his young face serious in the lamplight. "Mr. Jeremiah?" "Yes." "You think Mama's really coming back?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Jeremiah looked at this brave, scared boy who was trying so hard to be strong for his little brother. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know you boys are safe here tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." Benjamin nodded, relief washing over his features. "Thank you," he whispered, "for the food and for not lying to me. Grown-ups usually lie when they think kids can't handle the truth." As Jeremiah tucked blankets around both boys later that night, listening to their steady breathing in the quiet cabin, he realized something had shifted inside him. For the first time in months, he felt like he had a purpose beyond just surviving another day. Outside, the Kansas wind still howled across the prairie, but inside his small cabin, 3 souls who'd found each other were beginning to build something that might just save them all. What would tomorrow bring for this unlikely family? And could a broken man really become the father these abandoned boys so desperately needed? Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, but Jeremiah was already awake, standing over the stove making breakfast when he heard the boys stirring. The smell of frying eggs and fresh coffee filled the small space, creating something he hadn't experienced in years, the warm feeling of home. "Is that real eggs?" David's small voice came from the doorway, his hair sticking up in all directions. "Real as they come," Jeremiah smiled, turning to see both boys watching him with wonder. "Found them in the henhouse this morning." Benjamin rubbed his eyes, still not quite believing he'd slept in a real bed. "You got chickens?" "6 of them. Ornery birds, but they lay good eggs." Jeremiah plated the food, noting how the boys' faces had more color this morning. A good night's sleep and full bellies had worked miracles. "Come eat. We got work to do today." As they sat around the table, David swinging his legs from the chair, Jeremiah watched them eat with the careful attention of children who'd learned never to waste food. But there was something different now. They weren't gulping down their meal like it might disappear. They were eating like children who expected another meal to come later. "What kind of work?" Benjamin asked between bites. "Well," Jeremiah said, sipping his coffee, "winter's coming fast. This cabin needs some fixing up if 3 people are going to live in it comfortable." The fork stopped halfway to Benjamin's mouth. 3 people. That's right. You boys need a place to stay while we wait for your mama. Might as well make it a good place. David looked at his older brother with huge eyes. Benjamin's face went through a dozen expressions. Hope, fear, disbelief, And finally, careful joy. You'd really let us stay? For real. For real, Jeremiah confirmed. But only if you're willing to help out. I can't do all the work myself. Benjamin straightened in his chair like a soldier accepting orders. We're good workers, Mr. Jeremiah. We'll do whatever you need. After breakfast, Jeremiah showed them around the property. The boys marveled at everything. The chicken coop, the small barn, the well with its squeaky pulley, the fields that stretched toward the horizon. To them, it was a kingdom of possibilities. Can we really help fix things? David asked, his shyness melting away in the morning sunshine. Course you can. Benjamin, you look strong enough to help me with the roof repair. And David, those chickens need someone to collect their eggs every morning. Think you can handle that? David's chest puffed out with pride. I can do that. I'm real gentle with animals. As the days turned into a week, then 2 weeks, something magical happened. The cabin began to transform from a lonely man's shelter into a real home. Benjamin proved surprisingly handy with tools, holding board steady while Jeremiah hammered, learning to measure twice and cut once. David took his chicken duties seriously, naming each bird and talking to them like old friends. But it was the evenings that truly changed everything. After supper, they'd sit by the fire, and Jeremiah would read to them from his small collection of books. Benjamin followed along, sounding out difficult words, while David listened with the focused attention of someone discovering stories for the first time. You're a real good reader, Benjamin told him one night. Better than the teacher back in before. Your mama taught you some letters? Jeremiah asked. Some. Before Papa died, she used to read to us every night. But after, Benjamin's voice trailed off. Jeremiah understood. Grief changed people, sometimes in ways that hurt the ones they loved most. But he also understood something else. These boys needed more than just food and shelter. They needed to feel valuable, wanted, part of something bigger than just survival. Benjamin, he said one morning in late October, how are you with numbers? The boy's face lit up. Real good. I can add and subtract, and Papa was teaching me times tables before he got sick. Perfect. I need help figuring out how much hay to buy for winter, and how much it'll cost. Think you're up for it? Benjamin attacked the problem like a puzzle, writing numbers in the dirt with a stick, carrying figures and checking his work twice. When he announced the final total, Jeremiah felt a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. That's exactly right, he said. You got a head for figures, boy. The compliment made Benjamin glow with pleasure. How long had it been since someone had praised this child for his abilities instead of seeing him as a burden? But their peaceful routine was interrupted one afternoon when Dr. Catherine Whitmore rode up to the cabin. Jeremiah's stomach clenched with worry as he saw her serious expression. Dr. Whitmore, he called, wiping his hands on his pants. Something wrong. She dismounted gracefully, her medical bag in one hand. Mr. McCade, I hope you don't mind the visit, but I heard you've taken in some children. Benjamin and David appeared from behind the cabin, where they'd been stacking firewood. Both boys went still at the sight of the strange woman. These are Benjamin and David, Jeremiah said carefully. Boys, this is Dr. Whitmore. She's the town doctor. Dr. Whitmore studied the children with professional eyes, taking in their clean clothes, healthy color, and the way they stood close to Jeremiah without fear. How are you boys feeling? Any sickness? Any concerns? We feel good, ma'am, Benjamin said politely. Mr. Jeremiah takes real good care of us. I can see that. Her expression softened slightly. Mr. McCade, might I have a word with you privately? Jeremiah's heart hammered as they walked a few steps away from the boys. This was it. Someone had complained, and now the authorities were getting involved. Doctor, I know what this looks like, but, Mr. McCade, she interrupted gently, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I'm concerned about those children's welfare. His shoulders sagged. They're fine. Better than fine. Look at them. I am looking at them, she said. And what I see are two healthy, well-cared-for children who clearly trust and respect you. That's not what I expected to find. Jeremiah blinked in surprise. What did you expect? Honestly? Two neglected children being kept by a man who didn't know what he was doing. She glanced back at the boys, who were trying not to obviously eavesdrop. Instead, I see a family. Relief flooded through him so strongly his knees almost buckled. So you're not here to take them away? On the contrary, I'm here to offer my services as their doctor, should you need them. And perhaps, she hesitated, then continued, to offer some advice about the talk in town. Ice formed in his stomach. What kind of talk? The kind you need to be prepared for. Not everyone in Millbrook thinks a single man should be raising children who aren't his blood relatives. Some folks are starting to ask questions. As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching horses came from the direction of town. Multiple riders, moving fast, their purpose unclear but their timing ominous. Jeremiah looked at the boys, who had stopped pretending not to listen and were now watching the horizon with growing alarm. Benjamin's hand found David's automatically, and both children moved closer to Jeremiah. Mr. Jeremiah? Benjamin's voice was small and scared. Are those people coming for us? The riders were close enough now to see clearly. Sheriff Morton in the lead, followed by three men Jeremiah recognized as town council members. Their faces were set with grim determination. Dr. Whitmore stepped closer to Jeremiah. Whatever happens next, she said quietly, remember that those boys need you to be strong. Don't let them see you doubt yourself. As the horses drew up to the cabin, Jeremiah felt everything he'd built over the past weeks hanging in the balance. The warm home, the children's laughter, the sense of purpose he'd rediscovered. All of it could disappear in the next few minutes. But as Benjamin slipped his small hand into Jeremiah's larger one, he realized something important. He wasn't the same broken man who'd sat alone in Murphy's saloon just weeks ago. These boys had changed him, and he'd be damned if he'd let anyone take them away without a fight. The question was, would love and determination be enough against the power of law and social convention? Sheriff Morton dismounted slowly, his badge catching the afternoon light as his boots hit the dusty ground. Behind him, Councilman Barnes, Reverend Hutchins, and Mayor Phillips formed a semicircle of authority that made the air feel thick with tension. Afternoon, McCade, Morton said, his voice carrying the weight of official business. We need to have ourselves a talk. Jeremiah felt Benjamin's hand tighten in his own, while David pressed closer to his other side. Dr. Whitmore remained where she stood, her presence a small comfort in the face of what was coming. What can I do for you, Sheriff? Jeremiah asked, proud that his voice came out steady despite the hammering of his heart. Councilman Barnes stepped forward, his merchant's clothes marking him as a man of status and influence. McCade, we've received reports about your arrangement here. Concerns have been raised about the welfare of these children. What kind of concerns? Dr. Whitmore spoke up before Jeremiah could respond. Because as the children's physician, I can assure you they're in excellent health. Reverend Hutchins cleared his throat, his pale eyes fixed on the boys with disapproval. Doctor, this isn't about their physical health. It's about the moral implications of an unmarried man raising children with no blood relation, no legal guardianship, and frankly, no means to provide for them properly. I'm providing for them just fine, Jeremiah said, his voice gaining strength. Are you? Mayor Phillips spoke for the first time, his tone condescending. You're a failed farmer, McCade. Your crops have failed 3 years running. Your wife left you. What makes you think you can succeed at raising children when you've failed at everything else? The words hit like physical blows, but before Jeremiah could respond, Benjamin stepped forward. He hasn't failed at nothing, the boy said fiercely. He fixed our roof so it don't leak, and he taught me to read better, and he makes sure David gets the bigger piece of meat even when there ain't much to go around. Benjamin, Jeremiah said quietly, let me handle this. But the boy wasn't finished. And he don't drink or curse or hit us when he's mad. He tells us stories and fixes our clothes and makes us feel like we matter. Sheriff Morton's expression softened slightly as he looked at the passionate defense from the 8-year-old boy. Son, we're not saying Mr. McCade is a bad man. We're just concerned about what's best for you and your brother. This is what's best. David spoke up for the first time, his small voice surprisingly strong. This is our home. Reverend Hutchins shook his head. Children don't understand what's proper. The Carlisle family in Junction City has agreed to take both boys. They're good Christian people with means to provide proper education and moral guidance. And separate them from everything familiar? Dr. Whitmore challenged. These children have been through enough trauma. Now you want to uproot them again. It's for their own good, Barnes insisted. McCade can barely feed himself, let alone 2 growing boys. And the arrangement is unseemly. People are talking. Jeremiah felt a familiar shame creeping up his neck. The same feeling he'd carried in the saloon, the weight of being judged and found wanting. But then he looked down at Benjamin and David, saw the fear in their eyes, and something inside him hardened into resolve. Let them talk, he said firmly. These boys aren't going anywhere. Now see here. Mayor Phillips stepped closer, his face flushing with anger. You have no legal right to these children. They're wards of the state now, and we have the authority to place them where we see fit. The state. Jeremiah's voice rose. Where was the state when they were starving in an alley? Where were all you good Christian folk when these boys needed help? That's beside the point, Hutchins said stiffly. The law is clear about such matters. Dr. Whitmore moved to stand beside Jeremiah. Actually, Reverend, the law requires proof of neglect or abuse before children can be removed from a home. I see neither here. Sheriff Morton looked uncomfortable. Now, Doctor, you know it's more complicated than that. The town council has concerns about the propriety. Since when is love and care improper? Jeremiah interrupted. These boys were dying when I found them. Now look at them. Look at their faces, their health, their happiness. How is that wrong? Benjamin moved to stand directly in front of the sheriff, his young face set with determination. Sheriff Morton, remember when your horse went lame last month? And Mr. Jeremiah fixed your wagon wheel for free? Remember how he helped Mrs. Patterson move her heavy sacks when her back was hurting? The sheriff's face showed recognition and discomfort. Yes, son, I remember. Then you know he's a good man. The best man we ever knew. Benjamin's voice cracked slightly. Please don't take us away from him. For a moment, the only sound was the wind across the prairie and the distant lowing of cattle. The officials exchanged glances, some of their certainty wavering in the face of the children's obvious attachment to their guardian. But then Councilman Barnes hardened his expression. This is exactly the problem. These children have become too attached to an inappropriate situation. It will only make it harder the longer we wait. You mean it'll be harder for you to explain to voters why you separated a happy family? Dr. Whitmore said pointedly. That's enough, Mayor Phillips snapped. We didn't come here to debate. We came to collect these children and place them in a proper home. As he spoke, more riders appeared on the horizon. But these weren't officials. Jeremiah recognized the distinct silhouette of Henrik Larsson's wagon, followed by several other neighbors. The Swedish immigrant family approached at a steady pace, their faces serious but determined. Sheriff Morton noticed them too, his hand moving unconsciously toward his gun belt. What's this about? Henrik Larsson climbed down from his wagon with the deliberate movements of a man who'd made a difficult decision. His 2 grown sons flanked him, along with the Kowalski family from the next farm over. Good afternoon, Sheriff, Henrik said in his accented English. We heard there was trouble here. This is official business, Larsson, Barnes said curtly. It doesn't concern you. When good neighbors face injustice, is everyone's concern, Henrik replied firmly. His weathered hand gestured toward Jeremiah and the boys. This man helped my family through harvest when my back gave trouble. Never asked for payment, never spoke of it to gain favor. This is man of honor. Eric Larsson stepped forward. Those boys help our children with their English. They're polite, well-mannered, clearly loved. What more does a child need? Mrs. Kowalski, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, addressed Dr. Whitmore directly. Doctor, you've seen these children. Tell these men the truth about their care. Dr. Whitmore straightened her shoulders. These children are healthy, well-nourished, and emotionally secure. They show every sign of being in a loving, stable home. As their physician, I see no medical reason for removal. The tide was shifting, and everyone could feel it. What had started as an official action against an isolated man was becoming a confrontation with a community that had decided to protect its own. But Reverend Hutchins wasn't finished. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fundamental impropriety of the situation. These children need proper moral guidance, and frankly, Mr. McCade's own moral character is questionable. How so? Jeremiah demanded. Your wife left you for another man. Your farm has failed repeatedly. You spend time in saloons. I went to that saloon once in 3 months. Jeremiah cut him off. And I left without drinking because I had children at home who needed me. As for my wife, she made her own choices. And yes, my crops failed, because of drought that affected every farmer in the county. Henrik nodded emphatically. Drought takes no sides, Reverend. Good men and bad men both lose crops to weather. Sheriff Morton looked around at the gathering crowd, then at the 2 boys who stood bravely beside their chosen father. His shoulders sagged slightly as he made a decision that would change everything. Well, he said slowly, seems to me we got ourselves a situation here that needs more consideration than we originally thought. The statement hung in the air like a promise or a threat, depending on where you stood. But for Jeremiah and the boys, it sounded like the first note of hope in what could have been their darkest hour. Would the sheriff's hesitation be enough to save their family, or were there still greater challenges ahead? Sheriff Morton's hand froze inches from his gun as a new voice cut through the tense afternoon air like a blade through silk. Well now, this is quite the gathering. Everyone turned to see Judge Harrison climbing down from his black carriage, his silver beard catching the sunlight as he surveyed the scene with sharp eyes. The territorial judge rarely visited small towns like Millbrook, and his presence changed everything in an instant. Your Honor, Mayor Phillips stammered, clearly caught off guard. We weren't expecting. I imagine you weren't, Judge Harrison said dryly, adjusting his spectacles. Dr. Whitmore sent word to my office about a potential injustice involving children. Thought I'd better see for myself before any irreversible decisions were made. Councilman Barnes stepped forward, trying to regain control. Judge, we're simply following proper procedures. These children need to be placed in an appropriate home. Define appropriate, the judge interrupted, his gaze moving to Benjamin and David, who stood like young soldiers beside Jeremiah. From what I can observe, these boys appear well cared for, clean, healthy, and strongly attached to their guardian. Reverend Hutchins cleared his throat importantly. Your Honor, surely you understand the moral questions raised by an unmarried man of questionable character. Questionable how? Judge Harrison's voice carried the authority of decades on the bench. Has Mr. McCade been charged with any crimes? Has he shown violence toward these children? Neglect? Abuse? Well, no, but then what we're discussing is social opinion, not legal grounds. The judge walked closer to Jeremiah and the boys, his keen eyes missing nothing. Young man, he addressed Benjamin, are you afraid of Mr. McCade? No, sir, Benjamin said firmly. He's the kindest man we ever met. Has he ever hurt you or your brother? Never. Not once. He fixes our clothes when they tear and reads us stories every night. Judge Harrison nodded, then knelt to David's level. And you, little fellow? Are you happy here? David's small voice was clear and certain. This is home. Mr. Jeremiah loves us. The judge stood slowly, his face thoughtful. Sheriff Morton, what exactly prompted this visit today? Morton shifted uncomfortably. Well, Your Honor, the town council received complaints about the arrangement. Some folks think it's not proper. Some folks think many things, Judge Harrison said coolly. The law, however, requires evidence of harm or neglect before removing children from a home. Do you have such evidence? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Dr. Whitmore stepped forward. Your Honor, as the children's physician, I can testify that they're in excellent health and show every sign of being loved and well cared for. And I can testify that this man helped my family when we needed it most, Henrik Larsson added. He asks for nothing, gives freely, and those boys shine with happiness. Judge Harrison walked around the small group, studying faces, weighing the situation with the careful attention of someone who'd seen too many families torn apart by fear and prejudice. "Mr. McCade," he said finally, "step forward." Jeremiah felt his heart hammering as he approached the judge, leaving the boys with Dr. Whitmore's protective presence. "Tell me honestly," Judge Harrison said quietly, "what are your intentions regarding these children? To love them, protect them, and raise them as best I can." Jeremiah answered without hesitation. "They're my sons now in every way that matters. Even if their mother returns?" The question hit like a physical blow. Jeremiah glanced back at Benjamin and David, seeing the fear creep into their faces. "If she returns and can prove she's changed, that she can care for them properly, then I'll do whatever's best for the boys. But if she's just going to abandon them again, you'd fight for them?" "With my last breath." Judge Harrison studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Mayor Phillips, what specific concerns does the town council have?" Phillips puffed himself up. "Judge, this man is a known failure. His crops have failed. His wife left him. He has no stable income. Neither do half the farmers in Kansas after 3 years of drought," the judge pointed out. "Anything else? The moral impropriety of a single man raising children who aren't his blood. Is there a law against that in Kansas territory?" "Well, no, but then we're back to social opinion versus legal grounds." Judge Harrison's voice grew stern. "Gentlemen, I've seen many cases in my years on the bench. I've seen children removed from loving homes because of social prejudice, and I've seen the damage it causes. I've also seen children thrive in unconventional families that love them." Reverend Hutchins stepped forward desperately. "But Judge, surely you must consider the spiritual welfare of these children. They need proper Christian guidance. From what I can see, they're being taught kindness, generosity, and love. Those are Christian virtues, last I checked." The judge's tone brooked no argument. "Unless you have evidence of actual harm or neglect, this matter is closed." "But Your Honor," Barnes began. "Closed," Judge Harrison repeated firmly. Then his expression softened as he looked at the boys. "However, I do have one requirement." Jeremiah's stomach dropped. "Here it comes, the condition that would change everything. These children need legal protection. Mr. McCade, I'm ordering you to begin formal adoption proceedings within 30 days. That will give them legal status and end any future challenges to their placement." Relief flooded through Jeremiah so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. "Yes, Your Honor. Absolutely. And Dr. Whitmore, I'm appointing you as court liaison to monitor the children's welfare and report back to me in 6 months." "It would be my honor, Judge," she replied with a smile. Mayor Phillips's face was red with frustration. "Judge, you can't simply ignore the concerns of an entire town." "I'm not ignoring them. I'm ruling on them. These children are legally remaining with Mr. McCade, and anyone who attempts to interfere with this family will answer to my court." The judge's voice carried the full weight of territorial law. "Is that understood?" The officials nodded reluctantly, their authority deflated by the higher power of judicial ruling. As Judge Harrison prepared to leave, he pulled Jeremiah aside. "Son, this won't be the end of it. Some folks never let go of their prejudices. You'll need to be strong and you'll need allies." "I understand, Your Honor." "Do you? Because raising those boys means more than just love and good intentions. It means proving every day that you're worthy of their trust. It means building something lasting in a world that's trying to tear you down." Jeremiah looked over at Benjamin and David, who were talking excitedly with Henrik's children, their faces bright with relief and joy. "They're worth whatever it takes." Judge Harrison smiled for the first time that afternoon. "I believe they are. And I believe you might just be the man to give it to them." As the judge's carriage disappeared toward town and the various groups began to disperse, Jeremiah felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the solid ground of legal protection beneath his feet. But Henrik Larsson's parting words carried a warning that sent chills down his spine. This is victory today, friend. But some battles, they come back when you least expect them. Watch your back, and watch those boys. What new challenges would test this fragile family, and how far would some people go to tear apart what love had built? 3 weeks after Judge Harrison's ruling, Jeremiah woke to the sound of Benjamin's terrified scream cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a knife through his heart. He bolted upright, instantly alert, and heard it again. Not Benjamin, but David, crying out in the grip of a nightmare that seemed to have both boys in its grasp. Jeremiah stumbled from his bed, pulling on pants as he rushed to their room. Benjamin sat on the edge of his cot, holding David, who thrashed and whimpered in his sleep. The older boy's face was pale with worry in the lamplight. "He won't wake up," Benjamin whispered, his voice shaking. "He keeps calling for Mama, but when I try to wake him, he just cries harder." Jeremiah knelt beside the small bed, gently placing a hand on David's fevered forehead. The little boy's skin was hot and damp with sweat, his breathing quick and shallow. "David," Jeremiah said softly, "it's just a dream, son. You're safe. You're home." David's eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a moment he didn't seem to recognize where he was, and his small body trembled with fear that went deeper than any nightmare. "Papa?" he whispered, the word cutting through Jeremiah like a blade. "Papa, why did you leave us?" Jeremiah felt his throat tighten. David had never called him Papa before, always Mr. Jeremiah, always keeping that small distance that protected his young heart from more disappointment. "I'm here," Jeremiah said gently, gathering the small boy into his arms. "I'm not going anywhere." David clung to him with desperate strength, his hot tears soaking through Jeremiah's nightshirt. "I dreamed they took us away again. I dreamed we had to go back to being nobody." "That's not going to happen," Jeremiah promised, rocking the child gently. "Judge Harrison made sure of that. This is your home now, legally and forever." But even as he spoke the comforting words, Jeremiah noticed something troubling. David's fever was getting worse, not better, and his breathing had developed a concerning wheeze. Benjamin seemed to read his thoughts. "He's been coughing more since yesterday, and he didn't eat much supper." Jeremiah felt David's forehead again, alarm growing in his chest. This wasn't just the aftermath of a nightmare. The boy was genuinely sick. "Benjamin, get dressed quick. We need to get Dr. Whitmore." The ride to town in the pre-dawn darkness was one of the longest of Jeremiah's life. David lay limp in his arms, alternating between burning fever and violent chills. Benjamin rode behind them, his young face set with worry that no 8-year-old should have to carry. Dr. Whitmore's house sat at the edge of town, a neat white building with a sign that read, "Catherine Whitmore, M.D." Jeremiah pounded on her door, not caring about the early hour. She appeared quickly, already pulling on her coat over her nightgown. One look at David's flushed face told her everything she needed to know. "Bring him inside quickly," she said, leading them to her examination room. "When did this start?" "Tonight, but Benjamin says he's been coughing more since yesterday," Jeremiah said, laying David on the examination table. Dr. Whitmore's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking David's pulse, listening to his chest, examining his throat. Her frown deepened as she worked. "It's pneumonia," she said finally, her voice serious but calm. "Fairly advanced. We need to get his fever down immediately and start treatment." "Is he going to be all right?" Benjamin asked, his voice small and scared. Dr. Whitmore looked at the frightened boy with gentle honesty. "He's very sick, Benjamin, but we caught it in time, and I'm going to do everything I can to help him get better." What followed were the longest 3 days of Jeremiah's life. Dr. Whitmore had them stay at her house so she could monitor David constantly. The little boy drifted in and out of consciousness, burning with fever one moment and shivering the next. Jeremiah never left his side. He spooned medicine between David's cracked lips, bathed his fevered body with cool cloths, and whispered stories and promises into the child's unhearing ears. Benjamin helped with quiet determination, fetching water and clean cloths, reading aloud from storybooks when David was awake enough to listen. The 8-year-old had appointed himself his brother's protector, and nothing would move him from that post. On the second night, as David's fever spiked dangerously high, Dr. Whitmore pulled Jeremiah aside. "I have to be honest with you," she said quietly. "The next few hours are critical. His body is fighting hard. But what?" Jeremiah's voice was hoarse from exhaustion and fear. "But sometimes fighting isn't enough. You should prepare yourself and Benjamin for the possibility that David might not make it through the night." The words hit Jeremiah like a physical blow. He looked through the doorway at the small boy lying so still in the bed, at Benjamin holding his brother's hand and whispering prayers he'd learned from some long ago Sunday school. "There has to be something more we can do," Jeremiah said desperately. "We're doing everything medicine knows how to do. The rest is up to David's strength and, well, some would say divine intervention." That night, Jeremiah sat beside David's bed and talked to him about everything and nothing. He told him about the farm they would plant together in spring, about the fishing trips they would take to the creek, about the house they would build when David was old enough to help. "You can't leave us now, son," he whispered as dawn approached and David's breathing grew more labored. "We just found each other. We need more time." Benjamin had fallen asleep in his chair, but he woke as the first rays of sunlight crept through the window. "Papa?" he said softly, and Jeremiah realized the boy was talking to him, not David. "Yes, son? Is David going to die?" The question hung in the air like a sword over their hearts. Jeremiah wanted to lie, to offer false comfort, but these boys had been lied to enough in their short lives. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know he's fighting hard, and he knows we love him. Sometimes that's enough to tip the balance." As if summoned by their conversation, David's eyes fluttered open. For the first time in 3 days they were clear and focused. "Papa?" he whispered, the word barely audible but unmistakably meant for Jeremiah. "I'm here, David. I'm right here. Are we still home? Are we still a family?" Jeremiah felt tears he'd been holding back for days finally spill over. "Yes, son. We're still home. We're still a family. And we always will be." David smiled then, a small, weak smile that nonetheless lit up the room like sunrise. "Good. I was scared they might take us away while I was sleeping." Dr. Whitmore appeared in the doorway, her face showing cautious hope as she observed David's improved alertness. "Well now," she said softly, "look who's decided to rejoin us." As she checked David's vital signs, Jeremiah saw something in her expression that made his heart leap with hope. The crisis had passed. The fever was breaking. Their little family was going to survive this test. But in the back of his mind, Henrik Larsson's warning echoed. Some battles come back when you least expect them. What other trials would test the bonds they'd fought so hard to protect? The sound of shattering glass exploded through the pre-dawn quiet, followed by the acrid smell of smoke that sent Jeremiah bolting upright in his bed with his heart pounding like thunder. "Fire!" Benjamin's voice cracked with terror from the next room. "Papa, there's fire outside." Jeremiah threw on his clothes and burst through the door to find both boys pressed against the window, their faces illuminated by the orange glow dancing across the yard. Outside, his barn was engulfed in flames that reached toward the star-filled sky like grasping fingers. "Get away from the window," he ordered, his mind racing through the implications. The barn held his winter hay, his tools, everything he needed to keep the farm running. Without it, they'd have nothing to feed the animals, no way to work the land come spring. But as he stepped outside to assess the damage, something caught his eye that made his blood run cold. This wasn't an accident caused by a knocked-over lantern or lightning strike. Someone had thrown a burning bottle through the barn door. The broken glass glittered in the firelight like scattered diamonds. "Benjamin, take David to the root cellar and stay there until I come get you," he called back to the house. "But Papa, now!" Jeremiah's voice carried an authority that sent both boys scurrying to safety. As neighbors began arriving to help fight the blaze, Jeremiah noticed something else troubling. Henrik Larsson and his sons were among the first to appear, along with Dr. Whitmore and several other families who'd supported them during the custody fight. But conspicuously absent were the townspeople who'd opposed their family arrangement. This was set deliberately, Henrik said grimly as they watched the flames consume years of hard work. Bottle thrown through door. Whoever did this wanted to send message. Eric Larson found tracks leading away from the barn, boot prints in the soft earth that headed directly toward town. 3 men, maybe 4. They didn't try very hard to hide their trail. By the time they'd managed to contain the fire and keep it from spreading to the house, the barn was nothing but smoldering ruins. Jeremiah stood looking at the destruction, calculating costs he couldn't afford and replacements he couldn't make before winter set in hard. "Mr. Jeremiah?" David's small voice came from behind him. The boys had emerged from the root cellar despite his instructions, drawn by the need to see how bad the damage was. "It's all right, son," Jeremiah said, though they both knew it wasn't true. "We'll figure something out." Benjamin's 8-year-old face was set with determination that reminded Jeremiah powerfully of himself at that age. "Who would do this to us?" "I don't know," Jeremiah lied, though he had his suspicions. "But whoever it was, they're not going to break us." Dr. Whitmore approached with her medical bag, checking the boys for smoke inhalation and shock. "This is escalating beyond what I expected," she said quietly to Jeremiah. "Someone is trying to force you out." "Let them try," Jeremiah replied, but his voice lacked the confidence he was trying to project. Over the next few days, the true scope of their situation became clear. Without the barn, he had no shelter for the animals when winter storms hit. Without the stored hay, he couldn't feed them through the cold months. Without his tools, he couldn't work the fields come spring. Henrik and his family did what they could, sharing some of their hay and offering temporary shelter for the horses and cows. But it wasn't enough to replace what they'd lost, and everyone knew it. "You could sell the land," Dr. Whitmore suggested during one of her visits. "Move somewhere fresh, start over." "With what money?" Jeremiah asked. "After I pay debts and try to replace what we lost, there won't be enough left to buy new land anywhere worth farming." The boys listened to these conversations with the careful attention of children who'd learned that adult problems usually meant changes they couldn't control. David had grown quieter since the fire, staying close to Jeremiah's side and startling at unexpected sounds. Benjamin had thrown himself into helping with increased intensity, as if working harder might somehow solve their mounting problems. But the real blow came a week after the fire, when Mayor Phillips arrived with an official-looking document in his hands. "McCade," he said, not bothering to dismount from his horse. "I'm here on behalf of the bank. You're 3 months behind on your land payments, and with the destruction of your barn and equipment, they're calling in the loan." Jeremiah felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "I can catch up the payments. Give me until spring." "Spring's too late. You've got 30 days to pay in full or the bank forecloses." Phillips's face showed no sympathy. "Maybe this is for the best. You could move to town, find work that's more suitable to your circumstances." After Phillips left, Jeremiah sat on his front steps with his head in his hands, trying to figure out how to explain to the boys that they might lose their home after all. 30 days to come up with money he didn't have, to replace equipment he couldn't afford, to save a dream that was slipping through his fingers like water. "Papa!" Benjamin appeared beside him, his young face serious with worry. "Are we going to lose the farm?" Jeremiah looked into those trusting eyes and felt something crack inside his chest. How could he explain that all their work, all their hope, might not be enough against the forces arrayed against them? "I don't know, son," he said honestly. "But I promise you this, whatever happens, we stay together. No matter what, we're a family." Benjamin nodded solemnly, then surprised Jeremiah by climbing into his lap like he had when he was smaller. "David and me, we've been talking. We think maybe someone burned our barn on purpose." "What makes you think that?" "'Cause the same day it happened, we saw Councilman Barnes talking to some rough-looking men behind the general store, and they were looking toward our place when they talked." A chill ran down Jeremiah's spine. If Benjamin was right, if the fire had been deliberately set by people trying to force them out, then this was more than just bad luck or economic hardship. This was warfare. That evening, as he tucked the boys into their beds, David grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "Papa, are bad people trying to hurt us?" Jeremiah sat on the edge of the small bed, choosing his words carefully. Some people don't understand what we have here. They think families should only look one certain way, and when they see something different, it scares them. But we're not scary, David said, his 5-year-old logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. No, son, we're not. But scared people sometimes do scary things. As he prepared for bed himself, Jeremiah found himself thinking about Martha, his ex-wife who'd left him for a traveling merchant with promises of an easier life. She'd told him he'd never amount to anything, that he was too soft for the harsh realities of frontier life. Maybe she'd been right. Maybe he wasn't strong enough to protect what mattered most. But then he thought about Benjamin's fierce loyalty, David's trusting smile, the way both boys had flourished under his care. Whatever else he might have failed at, he hadn't failed them. Not yet. The question was whether love and determination would be enough to overcome the forces trying to tear their family apart, or if some battles were too big for one man to win. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and Jeremiah couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt heavy with the promise of snow, delivered by a nervous postal clerk who wouldn't meet Jeremiah's eyes as he handed over the official envelope. McCade family, Jeremiah read aloud from the return address, his voice catching on the surname that had become precious to all three of them. But the sender's name made his blood freeze in his veins. Martha Simmons, Topeka, Kansas. Benjamin looked up from where he was helping David with his morning lessons, both boys sensing the shift in their father's demeanor. "What is it, Papa?" Jeremiah's hands trembled slightly as he broke the wax seal, unfolding pages covered in Martha's familiar handwriting. As he read, the color drained from his face like water from a broken bucket. "Dear Jeremiah," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well. I have heard through mutual acquaintances about your situation with the 2 children you have taken in. While I admire your charitable impulses, I believe it is time for a more practical solution." The words blurred together as Jeremiah's worst nightmare took shape on the page. Martha had remarried, a successful businessman with political connections. They were moving to California, where her new husband had business interests, and she was offering to take the boys. "I know you've grown attached to them," the letter continued, "but surely you can see that I could provide them with opportunities you simply cannot. Good schools, proper society, a secure future. My husband has agreed to legally adopt them, giving them his name and all the advantages that come with it. We could offer them a real family, Jeremiah, something you, as a single man, simply cannot provide." Benjamin had moved closer, reading over Jeremiah's shoulder with the quick intelligence that had always amazed his adoptive father. The boy's face went pale as he understood what the letter meant. "She wants to take us away," Benjamin whispered, the words barely audible. "She can't," Jeremiah said firmly, though his voice shook with uncertainty. "Judge Harrison ruled." "Keep reading, Papa," Benjamin said quietly, pointing to the bottom of the page. The final paragraph hit like a physical blow. "I should mention that my husband has connections with territorial officials who could review the custody arrangement. Given your recent financial difficulties and the questions some people have raised about a single man raising children, it might be wise to consider this offer seriously. We will be in Millbrook next Friday to discuss this matter in person. I do hope you'll see reason." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Martha had found a way to reopen the custody case, armed with new ammunition. His financial troubles, the barn fire, the mounting debts that threatened their home. David, who had been quietly working on his letters, looked up with confusion in his dark eyes. "Who wants to take us, Papa?" Jeremiah knelt beside the small boy, his heart breaking at the trust and fear warring in that innocent face. "Remember I told you boys about my wife who went away? Well, she wants to meet you." "Why?" David's question was simple, but it cut to the heart of everything. "Because..." Jeremiah struggled for words that would explain without terrifying. "Because she thinks she could give you things I can't." Benjamin's jaw set with determination that belied his 8 years. "We don't want things. We want you." The days that followed were a whirlwind of desperate preparation. Jeremiah consulted with every person who might offer help or advice. Dr. Whitmore researched territorial custody laws, looking for legal protections that might prevent Martha from reopening the case. Henrik Larsson rallied the neighboring families, building a wall of community support that might impress any reviewing officials. But underneath all the activity, Jeremiah wrestled with a terrible question. Was Martha right? Could he really provide the boys with everything they needed and deserved? His financial situation was genuinely dire. The barn fire had devastated his ability to farm successfully. The bank was demanding payment he couldn't make. Winter was coming, and he wasn't sure he could keep them all fed and warm until spring. Meanwhile, Martha could offer them security, education, social standing, all the things he'd failed to provide for his own children, if he'd ever had any. Thursday evening, as he tucked the boys into bed, David grabbed his hand with both of his small ones. "Papa, if the lady takes us away, will you forget about us?" The question shattered something inside Jeremiah's chest. "David, son, I could never forget you. Never. You and Benjamin are the best things that ever happened to me. But if we have to go, will you be all right? Will you be sad?" Jeremiah felt tears threatening for the first time since David's illness. This 5-year-old boy, facing the possibility of being torn from the only stable home he'd ever known, was worried about his guardian's feelings. "I'll be very sad," Jeremiah admitted. "But if it's truly what's best for you boys." "It's not," Benjamin interrupted from his own bed, his voice fierce with conviction. "Don't even think that, Papa. Nothing could be better than staying here with you." Friday morning dawned gray and cold, with the smell of snow in the air. Jeremiah dressed carefully in his best clothes, patched but clean, worn but respectable. The boys wore their nicest outfits, the ones Dr. Whitmore had helped them buy for special occasions. At precisely 10 o'clock, a fancy carriage pulled up to their modest cabin. Martha stepped down first, and Jeremiah felt a complicated mix of emotions at seeing her again. She was still beautiful, but there was a hardness around her eyes that hadn't been there when they'd married 5 years ago. Behind her came a portly man in an expensive suit, obviously her new husband. And behind him, to Jeremiah's shock and dismay, came Mayor Phillips and 2 men he didn't recognize, both wearing badges that marked them as territorial marshals. "Hello, Jeremiah," Martha said, her voice carefully neutral. "You look well." "Martha." He stepped protectively in front of the boys, who had instinctively moved closer to his sides. "I got your letter." "Good. Then you understand why we're here." She gestured toward her husband. "This is Charles Simmons, my husband. Charles, this is Jeremiah McCade and the children I told you about." Simmons studied Jeremiah with the calculating eyes of a businessman evaluating a competitor. "McCade, I understand you've been caring for these boys." "I've been raising them," Jeremiah corrected firmly. "They're my sons." "Legally speaking, that's questionable," one of the marshals interrupted. "We're here to review the custody arrangement in light of new information about your circumstances." Benjamin stepped forward, his young face set with determination. "Ma'am, are you the lady who left us in the alley?" Martha's composure cracked slightly. Circumstances were difficult. I thought it was best." "You thought it was best to leave us with no food for 3 days?" Benjamin's voice carried hurt and anger beyond his years. "You thought it was best to make David cry every night wondering why his mama didn't love him enough to stay?" "Benjamin," Jeremiah said quietly, but the boy wasn't finished. "Mr. Jeremiah found us when we were dying. He fed us and clothed us and never once made us feel like we were burdens. He sat up all night when David was sick with pneumonia. He taught me to read better and helped me with my numbers and made us feel like we mattered." Martha's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. "That's enough. You're just a child. You don't understand what's at stake here." "I understand plenty," Benjamin shot back. "I understand that you only want us now because someone told you we were doing well. I understand that you left us when we needed you and came back when it was convenient." The confrontation was escalating beyond what anyone had expected, and Jeremiah could see the marshals taking notes, documenting everything for their report. Whatever happened next would determine the fate of their family forever. But as Martha opened her mouth to respond, the sound of approaching horses filled the air. Dr. Whitmore was arriving with Judge Harrison himself, flanked by Henrik Larson and what looked like half the county. The real battle for the McCade family was about to begin, and the outcome would determine whether love and determination could triumph over wealth and social pressure, or if some fights were simply too big for ordinary people to win.